chains to set me free. Died for me on that cursed tree. Redemption stormed the war on death.
Good evening and welcome. And I just want to say thank you for joining us. I know for so many people, this conversation is so loaded that your coming and engaging is required guts and a lot of humility. And I just want to say, I so appreciate that you've come to listen. Thank you so much. As we get into this conversation, I want to say a couple of things just so that you know the agenda. My goal is not to solve racism. It's not to have a political agenda or speak about who I vote for or how we resolve this issue. My goal is entirely to help our congregation navigate the Black Lives Matter conversation. And so if you've been married for a while, you'll know that you never really solve marriage issues by finding a perfect solution. The way you work through marriage issues, because they're relational, is you talk and you listen and you learn to listen. And if you're like me, what happens is when your wife's speaking, you're forming an argument in your head as to why she's wrong. And the journey is learning how to listen to her. And as you start to listen, you start to shift. And generally what happens is you wake up one day and you go, that issue's no longer an issue, and we don't know why. It's because you learned to listen. This conversation is not to solve things. It is to show how you listen and engage and ask friends questions. So I'm going to pray, and then I'm going to introduce some of the people I respect most in this city, friends who I love deeply, and who I believe are going to speak beautifully into this situation to help us as a community navigate through this. So Heavenly Father, I thank you that your grace can flood through this conversation. It can impact every single person listening. And I thank you, Jesus, that as we choose for this hour to just listen, I thank you that you can speak to us. We want you speaking to us. And you can shift our perspectives, and you can bring your truth and your love into this conversation. And I ask, God, that you will use every word we speak, and I ask that you protect us, and I ask that you protect the hearers from hearing wrong things or hearing how what we meant to say came out a little wrong. Lord, I pray that you protect both sides. And I ask, Jesus, that this begins a part of healing. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Friends, one more thing before I get into the conversation is I would ask that you don't comment, especially if you're on Facebook. The reason for this is I want you to listen and get the best out of this conversation. And if one person posts, then another person's going to post, and there's going to be lots of conversations going on at the same time. So please can I ask that you don't post? And if someone does because they joined the conversation a little later, please will someone inform them that we're not going to be posting on the comment section. But thank you again so much for joining us. So tonight I have, and it is such a privilege, I have my good friend, Mr. Khanbule, Nhlanhla Khanbule, who many of you know. He's involved in the education sector. He's an mfundisi, he's a pastor, and he's a deep friend of mine. And he started a private school in Mbuyazi, which is seriously making an impact in this world. And it is a privilege to have you. Thank you for coming, sir.
Good evening. Thanks, Ranch, for having us. Thank you.
Awesome. And then this beautiful lady here, Audrey Mbuyazi, she is Zimbabwean, like me, so she adds a different caliber of weight to the conversation. She is both a songwriter, she's a speaker, she's involved in the corporate world, and she is going to blow you away with her humility and love, and I think you're going to experience some nurturing as I've had as I've spoken to her. And then we have Russel Curtis over here. Hi, Russ. Russell, when he's not on sets like this, he's speaking to the United Nations or landing billions of rand coming into Durban. And Russell is a bridge builder in this city. So I've invited him to come in to lead us. And then we have Lutho over here. Hi, Lutz. Lutz is very nervous, but Lutz is our youth pastor, and I have so deeply enjoyed having conversations with him that have stretched me and helped me grow. So welcome, buddy. Audrey, I'm going to start with you. And one, I'm really feel privileged to have you. I really want you to feel that. But when I asked you if you would consider speaking to this, you jumped at it. In fact, you drove all the way down from the Midlands for one conversation. And I'm so grateful for that. But what was your motive? Why were you so passionate about having this conversation with us?
Well, thank you so much for having me here. And Ross, one of the reasons, that there's a few reasons, but the main one was he asked to talk. He wanted to have a conversation about what I thought about Black Lives Matter. And I thought, I am not missing this out, because I think it is definitely overdue, but so far it's great to talk. We need to talk, and not only because it's important to say what you want to say, but it's also important to hear what others are thinking. And the reason that I also wanted to be here was that I had two friends, two very good white friends who, you know, on visibly, I would almost say there isn't a single racist bone in their body, phoned me and said, Audrey, I just want to ask for your forgiveness. I'm like, oh gosh, what did you do? And they said, well, I don't know, but I mean, in case I've ever sort of shown you any racist ways or been racist towards you, I want to ask for forgiveness. And I had to have a long conversation with them to say, just because you're a particular color doesn't mean that you've been racist to me, to others. However, I probably also need to ask for forgiveness if we're going to be honest with each other, because maybe I haven't been racist towards you because you're my friend, but there's probably other people, other colors that I've been racist towards. And so I suddenly thought, this thing goes both ways, and I would so love to be in that conversation. The other thing was, I thought, you know what, I'd love to be able to say, this is a time for each and every single one of us to examine our hearts, to say, I know those white people are racist. I know they are. But have I ever been racist in any form to anyone? And acknowledge where we stand. If you're the perfect one and that's never happened to you, great. But I can tell you honestly now, as much as half my friends are white, I have probably in some shape or form shown some discrimination. We're just wired that way. We love to sort of put ourselves above someone else. And it's easier when the distinction is his color and my color. It's not so easy when we look the same.
Yeah.
So I'm here because I think I'd love to be a part of, let's talk, let's listen, let's hear each other, because I'm tired of living without in the quiet and see my kids experience what I experienced as a child.
Let's dive into that a little bit, because you grew up in Zim, first generation out of a colonial system, and now you're watching your kids go through it. Let's just go off script a bit and just speak to us a little bit about what they're saying to you and what you're saying back to them, and just open that up a bit.
Yeah, so my children, they've all finished school now. But while they were at school, they never really mentioned it, because it's one of those things like my daughter says, oh, this girl said to me, you're beautiful for a black girl. And I go, oh my gosh, and what did you do? She said, I didn't know what to do, so I walked away. And I think, wow, that's probably something that I experienced. Why is it 30 years later, someone is still feeling the freedom to say something like that? Yeah. What does it mean? What are you trying to say to that other person? So I'm sitting there, these children, and there's a whole bunch of our children who've been in private school education who have formed these black WhatsApp groups, and they are having conversations, and they're having conversations about how hurt they feel about the things that have been said and done to them. And I'm saying, great, this is a good space, but can we also make sure that we separate righteousness from anger?
Yes.
We need to know what is righteous and we need to know what is anger. You're allowed to feel both. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's what we do in those spaces. So having those conversations with my kids is about, what are you, as the Christian voice on that group, saying? How are you displaying your hurt? It's legit. It's legit when someone says to you, no, I won't say some of the other things, but it's legit when someone says those things to you. But you can be angry, but what are you going to do with that anger? Did you report it? Did you tell an adult? Did you tell your mom, who might not have done much but pray with you or tell the headmaster or something? But what are we going to do with the things that hurt us?
Yeah. I think part of why this conversation is so important is that there's a generation below us, our kids, who are looking somewhat like we looked at our parents and going, you have race issues and you need to deal with them. And how we deal with this conversation deeply affects our kids and the environment they grow up in. And really, this conversation is to help that as much as anything else. But Mfowethu, really such a privilege having you here as well, sir. You are the one party here who grew up, actually Russell did too, grew up in apartheid. And when Black Lives Matter happened, when the attack, the knee on the neck, when that whole event happened, I would presume, and we've spoken a little bit about how that caused emotion in you. Speak to us about that a little bit, and then tell us what you're desiring as an outcome for this conversation.
Good evening to the listeners at home and the saints at home. Thanks, Ross, Pastor Ross, for having us, and good evening to everyone. It reminded me, Mfundisi, of an era between 1983 and 1987 in my life. When I was young, I grew up in a township in Pietermaritzburg called Imbali. In that township, 1983, there was something called UDF, United Democratic Front, that was formed. And my brother happened to be a leader, deputy chairman of that particular formation in Pietermaritzburg. And as a result of that, obviously, we became a target of the special branch. The special branch, for those who do not know, are the special police that were led by that were initiated by the apartheid system to make sure that they clamped down on people who were resisting the system, particularly those that were defined as the communist or, the NC comrades, basically. That's number one. So because my brother was such an involved person, so our family became a target, to a point that two things happened. One, we were constantly harassed by the police. My other brothers, two younger brothers, who were, I think, anything between 3 and 5 years younger than him, were also on a regular basis arrested, without charges for 6 days, 7 days, because if you remember during those days, there was a state of emergency, especially between 1985 up to about 1989. So on a regular basis, we lived at home fearing the police. We lived at home fearing that we could be killed. We were constantly attacked when the political violence started erupting in the mid-80s again. Our house was burnt like 3-4 times, fired at several times at home. At the time I was still a young person. So to me, it reminded the days when we had to be chased by the dogs, the police dogs. We had to be chased by the hippos. We used to call them the hippos, those armored vehicles. Up to this day, to a certain extent, I still get scared when I see a police van because of that particular era. Now, that I said, there's two things happened. One is that we were constantly harassed by the police. But number two, my brother, who had a very promising career at Hewlett's Aluminium, which was called Alken at the time, had to be fired at Hewlett's because he was constantly, arrested, in prison without any charges. And as a result, today he's retired, obviously, he's 61, but poor because of the system that has, the ripple effects of what happened in the 80s are still haunting him now. They're still, to a certain extent, haunting his family now because sometimes he can't pay for the kids to go to school because that budding career, that promising career that he had, because he opted to fight an apartheid system that was cruel and evil to black people, he had to leave. He had to be fired at work, dismissed at work, simply because of that. So to me, it was a very emotional thing, because in as much as there has been transformation, Pastor Ross, in the police force. So the police are not a problem anymore, but certain key things are still not correct in the country. One, the social issues, and obviously the economic issues, which we can discuss a little bit later. But until the second part of your question was what has to be done, we can maybe come back to that later. But I strongly believe that a conversation like this will make someone at home realize how I feel, how I felt when I saw George Floyd on the floor, because it could have been me 20 years ago. It could have been me during the 80s. And there were several. Just another example, which I don't think I've ever shared with you. My father-in-law died during that phase. He was shot. My father-in-law, my wife's father, in 1985, he was shot by the police, by the system, for doing what? For resisting apartheid and wanting freedom. So it's very emotional. My wife lost a father at the age of 9, simply because of the system. So it reminded me of all those things, why we had to move, I had to move schools, etc. So it was quite emotional. And so let me leave it there. We can come back to the economic issues a little bit later, sir.
Yeah, I think what's important is that, careful there. One of the things that's important is that pain, it doesn't understand time.
That's right.
You can be healed, and you and I have many conversations about how we bring healing in this nation.
That's right.
But the pain, you would still feel the feelings you had back then. You may be able to process them differently, but it raises that, and I think we all have to know that when we address this issue.
That's correct.
And actually, just to add to that, I mean, essentially when my kids tell me about what they've been experiencing at school now, it brings back the things that I felt, and I'm like, oh gosh, I thought I'd let go of that.
Yeah.
But it still hurts.
Yes. Yeah. Russ, I'm going to turn to you. You have an incredible reputation across the city as being a bridge builder. And I know that has been despite some pretty rough stuff said to you. You've had quite a bit of anti-white meeting because of your political space. There's been a lot thrown your way. And I have heard incredible stories about you just being able to turn the other cheek and get on with the big stuff. How did you access the grace of God to do that? And do you have any stories that you could tell us of how that happened?
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Ross. Great to be here, and good to be on the panel with everyone. And these conversations are important, really. As awkward as they may be, as painful as they may take us to, it's really only through having these kinds of conversations that we can move forward. And not also fall into the enemy's plan, fall into someone else's game plan, and so on. So we have a level of discernment, we have a level of kingdom-mindedness. So Ross, I think when I was reflecting on this session, for me it's around these conversations of culture and race. It started causing me to reflect on my life. In answering your question, how did I access God's grace? Well, I think He just sort of poured it on me, and it was there at the right time, in the right way, in the right form. And how that came about for me, how have I been accessing His grace? How has He poured out His graces? I've lived on 3 different continents for extended periods of time. And so I've been the majority group in certain places, and I've been in the minority group in certain places. And having worked on 3 different continents in different countries and so on, excuse me, it's given me an appreciation of the beauty in God's created man.
Yeah.
And I've enjoyed engaging. You might say I was forced, in moving around quite a bit, different countries, different continents. If I wanted to have a friend, I had to speak to someone who was different to me.
Yeah.
And so that's given me a real rich appreciation of the beauty in God's created man. And more than the appreciation, what I've done over the years, not consciously, is I've appropriated different elements in people's culture and made it my own.
Yes,
You
yeah.
know, I wear some of those kinds of clothing. I use some of those kinds of words. I act in this kind of a way.
Yeah.
And it's drawn on that grace that God has given me over this period of time, because Romans 8:28 rules. And I want more and more, as I speak tonight, as I speak in the days go by, to keep trying to anchor my thoughts in the Word of God, because it's only through His Word that we can navigate through this. And so through all of those multicultural experiences, Romans 8:28 has ruled, where God has worked all things together for the good of those who love Him and are called by His name. The other part of your question, how have I accessed God's grace? I work for the city. I've got roles in business. And yes, I've heard things said to me. I've heard things said about the Caucasian culture group, whether European westernized. The other part that has manifested in me in God's grace, and I've drawn down on God's grace, is I'm quite task-oriented.
Yeah.
So you can say stuff to me and, okay, cool, great, but can we get the stuff done, please?
Yes.
So I'm grateful that I can't sustain an argument. Not an argument, a dispute. I can't sustain a fight for days and weeks. I find it exhausting and tiring and an absolute waste of time. I just want to get some stuff done, and I can't do it on my own, so I need Lutz to do it with me.
Yeah.
So things can be said to me, but I try to limit the amount of time that I spend having that offend me and mull over me, because I just want to move on. I want to press on.
Yeah.
I want to keep going. And if you'll allow me to just close with this, Philippians 3 verse 12. Not that I've already obtained all of this is Paul speaking, or I've already arrived at my goal, but I press on to take hold of that for which Christ took hold of me. So forgetting what's behind and straining towards what's ahead is kind of what has been built into me over the years. And so I wasn't always a believer, but I reckon God's graces was there.
It was working.
Right from then until now.
Russ, yesterday you preached to us for a very long time, and then you were silent for ages. Just, you have a framework for how we're going to get through this, and it's a framework that I think our congregation really needs to hear. I'd love you to give it without stealing your next question.
Yeah, Ross, if you'll allow me, before I get to that, I just wanted to say that in the preparations and some of the discussions that we had, one of the things that my family is like is we enjoy a little laugh more often than not. And I'm quite happy to be the butt of that joke. And so I enjoy, even when we have tough conversations, just getting over myself, getting beyond myself, and trying to find some common humanity in these discussions. Because if we take ourselves too ridiculously seriously, now don't hear what I'm not saying. This issue's serious. This issue's important. But I don't ever want to take myself so seriously that I become permanently grumpy and mean and bitter and angry. So, Ross, I also wanted to say to everyone out there that those who know me, I'm not perfect. And I don't hold myself out to be a model for much. And I think we're all like that, So for me, I don't want people to look too much to me, or look too much even to you, or to Lutho, or to Audrey or Nhlanhla, for the model, or for the example, or for the epitome, or for the clarity. In this discussion around cultures and race, our eyes need to be less there and more there.
Yeah.
So I'm here saying that just this week, this past 10 days or so, I found myself in a really awkward WhatsApp conversation, which caught me off guard. And it was about this exact issue, about Black Lives Matter and George Floyd and so on. And I don't think I had fully prepared myself for the conversation.
Yeah.
And so for everyone out there, if you're feeling caught off guard, it caught me off guard. And we do need to perhaps be a bit more prepared for these conversations and move forward in them. So Ross, I'll hold off on the balance of your question. We can maybe come back to,
Okay, cool.
to this. I
full
do
step.
have some handles, some practical handles that I didn't think of them. Other people gave them to me as I looked into this matter and said, how can we move us forward?
Awesome. So, Lutz, relax, it's going to be good. And I'm going to read this question to you. You represent a younger generation, and you've shared some of your struggles with me regarding white people especially. And just so that you know, I've never engaged with someone who has done those kind of conversations with so much humility. I don't know if it's because I'm his boss, but you've just been exemplary in how you've spoken to me about this stuff. But tell me some of your struggles and how the event has affected you, and speak to us, because you're speaking from your perspective, but also you represent a group of people. So kind of feel free, and I think we'll be able to take it.
Okay, cool. So I'm just going to try to run with this as much as I can. But for me, it's not so much even an event. It wasn't the George Floyd incident, because what happens in South Africa, in the South African context, is that, or how I think of it, is that Paul called me before the George Floyd incident happened to actually check how I was doing about my dad. And I remember thinking, should I speak about this race thing that's so heavy in my heart? Because it was, what happens is that anything in South Africa that's political quickly becomes racial. And so a ton of people during lockdown have got a lot of time on their hands and are very upset about politics.
Amen.
And so in the spaces that I'm, like, as a young person, even an old person with like that much time on your hands in lockdown, you're on social media a lot. Yeah. And what happened is that while I was still processing the thing on my father and using, like, at first using Facebook as an escape and stuff like that, it became so frustrating that the place I was using as escape was the place that was causing me so much pain.
Yeah.
Because so much of the political conversation had become racial. And then the thing that grieved me the most was that this is people I've grown up with. This is people I know and love, even in this community, because I'm very immersed in white community. Like, as I say, I feel like, and a lot of people in my circles are black people whose parents did well enough for us to grow up poor in white communities. and so for us, it's, so from that perspective, it's been very hurtful to see the things that people are saying. I used to believe that racism was like a Avi beer kind of issue, like very right-wing people that are, they've got problems, but a very select few people. The rest of people, they're not racist, you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But just those 3 weeks on Facebook showed me so much about the way people are thinking, and given the opportunity, the things they will say about each other. And that caused me, like I say, a lot of grief. I became a little bit distrustful or anxious to talk to people that I felt comfortable talking to before because of the way I thought that would go. And then just to speak to my own struggles while I think, when I think of stuff like that, I think so much of the way we grew up, because people see middle class me and sometimes will use me as an example to say, well, look at him. Surely there's no problem.
Yeah.
They don't know that, like I said, growing up poor in a white community, that for probably 6 years of my childhood, of primary school, we were living in a one room, and when I say one room, I mean there was a bedroom and a bathroom, and we all slept in that bedroom and bathroom. Understand? 4 of us. And our kitchen was someone's garage that we were renting from. They'd drive in and drive out, and we'd be making eggs. They don't know that kind of stuff, because you don't show that stuff off, you know? And that's the experience of so many black people. They don't know that if my parents, lose their job and we can't pay rent at that place that already sucks, our fallback plan is the Eastern Cape, where they only got electricity in 2010.
Yeah.
So all of these things come to mind. They don't know that, as I'm so comfortable at, people judge me not just by seeing me and thinking this could be a nice person. They have to wait to hear me speak articulately to like me.
Yeah.
Understand? I have to walk on the beach with a surfboard and still feel out of place, and still watch people pull their stuff closer to themselves, or still at my friend's bride, still say, when they speak about people like Jacob Zuma, call them your mates. You understand? All of that stuff is
Personal.
Is deeply personal to me, and it hurts. And I was telling you about the encounter where, because I wanted to show you how it's affected my thinking over time and other young people over time. And I think of my nephew who's only 2 and what he's going to grow up to think like. So I was going to an ATM with my mother, and the white lady walks past us going to the same ATM, and she's walking just faster than us. So she gets there first, and we stop at the second one, and we're trying to investigate if it like prints paper or something like that. My thinking in that moment was, how do I make this white lady feel safe so she doesn't think that me and my mother are going to rob her?
Yeah.
I shouldn't have to think that way. Black people shouldn't have to think that way. That's something that society has showed us, not by what people speak or what government has done. It's because of how polarized the color issue is in South Africa, you understand? And so stuff like that, that's been like my struggle. And then again, being associated with success or as an excuse to say there's no such thing as racism because look at how Lutho's doing, understand? Not understanding that I make up a very small buffer in the whole thing and that 1,000 more people are not as well off as me.
Lutz, firstly, I just want to say thank you for sharing very vulnerably there. I'm going to kind of dive in a little bit more because I know there's a large group of people who are going, that's the government's fault. And I know that that's hard to hear. And I want you to, when you go through those experiences, what's going through your mind?
So, for like the times when I think about this the most is when I'm walking in town, for example, if I'm going home. Like, so my journey home, say from high school, is to leave DHS, get on a taxi, get on another taxi that's going to take me to Port Edward on the south coast. And if you drive through that landscape, all you can see is that this side is like the word bougie, like it's really up class, up market, this side of the highway, all the way down to the coast. And this side is all rural and it's all separated by one highway. And so that's the place that normally, and like in town here, you see, like I was telling you earlier, you see black people chasing taxis, you see them running after trains in the morning. Like you see that experience and it starts a conversation here, how did we get to this place? And so, because I've thought about it for so long now, I've come to the place where I say the average black person is just a victim of two crimes. It's a victim of history and like what colonialism and apartheid has done to us. And then after 94, how people have, well, we say government has failed us. I still need to investigate how much they failed us. But they have failed us because systems that don't work or the corruption and all the rest of that stuff and promises that we've been sold haven't come to pass. And so that's how I view the whole thing when you say it's a government thing. Or I see it as most black people are victims of two crimes.
Yes.
I'd just like to add that from an older person's perspective. You know, sometimes you feel like when, as a young person, when you're facing a prejudice, when you're facing people who are judging you by what you look like, it only happens to you. I mean, I'm an educated person, and I stand in big what are they called? Boardrooms. But when I often walk in, I used to be a trainer. When I walked in, you know, you could see the people's faces go, what can she teach us? And maybe it's my own inference, but it's just the way that someone looks at you when they like don't feel like they've got any confidence in you. And only when you've done like the first hour that suddenly they start paying attention and thinking, oh, maybe I could learn something. And I think, and even situations where I've had like my my brother who was looking for an apartment. On paper, you'd apply, and of course on the phone, because he sounds like me, he'd get the whatever, renters would say, come through and have a look at the apartment. But when he, of course, he arrived, rang the bell, and the door was opened, and you were not as white as your voice is, it will be, oh, well, actually, it's just been taken. So sorry. I should have phoned before you left. And those subtle discriminations really affect your confidence, is the first thing. But not so much to bring you down, but to make you bolshy. Yeah. You know, like you go, I am going to wear the reddest jacket I can wear to get into that boardroom because they're going to know I'm good before I even open my mouth. And I think it's an anti-defensive mechanism. And I just think that enough, we are just tired of continually being the ones that has to put their best foot forward. I heard a conversation this week about how, as black people, when we are the only black in a particular setting. You know, you get invited to that one birthday party of the 3-year-old, and your 3-year-old is the only black 3-year-old in the class, and therefore you're the only black mum there. I mean, you walk in there and they're all wearing their lovely clothes, the other guys, that is, of different races. They are not black, they're just of different races. It's intimidating.
Yeah.
But you are expected to just arrive and fit in.
Yeah.
But often I find then when it's tipped the other way, and I've had a party, and I've invited my one white friend, and sometimes they're new white friends, they go, "So is it okay for me to be here?
Yeah.
Should I?" And I'm like, "I wouldn't have invited you if I didn't want you here," you know. So I think there's another thing that I'd like to come out of conversations like this to say, get a black friend, get a white friend, get an Indian friend, get somebody who's different from you. And then when we are the only different people in those settings, be comfortable or learn to be comfortable. I didn't just learn to be comfortable in white settings from the word go. It was something that I had to become comfortable with, just in the same way, and I'm just going to put it in plain words. When you are a woman and you walk into a room full of 50 guys, I mean, you just want to turn tail and run. It's exactly the same thing that happens to me when I walk in a room and there's 50 white people. And I'm comfortable with white people,
Yeah.
you know. But for those that haven't had that experience, it's completely daunting.
Chorus.
Yeah, thanks, Audrey. It kind of prompted me to answer a second part of what you were asking me.
Yeah.
And that is, so what should we be doing? And when I say we, I'm talking the minority groups in South Africa. So you've heard a bit of my history. And so I have, whether you want to say, been forced to engage about others, learn about others, speak to others, appreciate the diversity, appropriate some of them. I think what the minority groups in South Africa need to do is we need to exert ourselves a bit more. I'm going to be blunt. We need to get off our bottoms and go and find out what it's like at a majority black party. If I'm speaking to the Caucasians, the Europeans, what's it like to go to an Indian party? I'll be blunt. I think a lot of my culture group, we're either content or lazy,
Yeah.
or just disinterested.
Yeah.
And it's only at times like this now when we're like, oh, holy smokes, now worlds are on fire and I don't understand you and you don't understand me. Well, that's a little bit too late.
Yeah.
So what I do is I exert myself. I actively go and try and engage in black churches, in Indian weddings, in other minority groups' birthday parties. I even go to other culture groups' funerals.
That's a long going to.
It's a long going to. But Ross, what it gets me, and I'm not trying to get something out of it, it's just I have for my whole life appreciated diversity. I've appreciated appropriating elements of other people's culture, and I've appreciated the relationships, and I've appreciated what that, if I can use a harsh term, what it gives me in terms of a currency of engagement and understanding in language, in dress, in paradigms, in the way things are done, and so on. And so you asked me, so what should we do? What are some of the ways going forward? We, the minority groups of South Africa, we need to get off our bottoms a little bit and go and have some fun. Because it's not hard work.
Yeah.
It's not painful. It's not awkward. It's actually quite fun.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know about fun.
I'm a sadomasochist.
The first white 21st I went to was at varsity, right? So I'm this bumping 19-year-old, second year varsity. I get invited to a 21st birthday party. Spotterswood was her name. And I'm like, oh, this is my first white 21st. It's going to be pumping. So I dress appropriately. I get there. She greets me beautifully. And I think there was probably two of us there, you know, two of us people of color. But she was a wonderful woman. And proceeded to get to the food. We ate. It was so wonderful. And then I thought, well, it's like 9 o'clock now. The music should start soon so we can boogie on down. No, none of that. People sat in couches and talked the whole night.
Because white men can't dance. That's what's going on.
I don't know about, but there was just no. And then I found a group that was in the corner of the room that were reading Winnie the Pooh.
Oh, sorry.
Bruce Podmore was reading, oh, I said a name. Anyway, he was reading an A.A. Milne book to a few people that were listening. And I'm like, this is the 21st. God, what's going on? But as I sat down and I started listening to this man read, it was the most, I thought, I've never heard Winnie the Pooh read like this. It was fascinating. I went back to my res that night and I thought, that was the most different party I have ever been to. But I actually quite enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And I didn't go, oh, they didn't play music, they didn't serve this, I'm never doing that again. I just thought, it's different. That's right. It's worth the experience. And I was there to honor the women whose party it was, not to get the party that I wanted. And I think that's what I want to say to the minority groups. And I say that specifically because my children who live in this country feel like they're the minority when they're at school all the time.
Yeah.
Because no one wants to listen to their rap music. Nobody wants to put putu and mas on the menu. In fact, my son said the other day when they've had putu and mas available, he's actually stopped eating it because the other guys all look at him going, oh, what are you eating? Why are you eating that? And he loves it.
Yeah.
And I just think, try it. If you don't like it, that's okay. I don't always like pasta, but I'm not going to go, oh, never eat that stuff. That's so low class.
Yeah.
It's got nothing to do about class. It's got everything to do about what I love about my culture, and what I honor about your culture.
Yeah.
A little in your world, in my world.
I think one of the things that's been robbed, I think Satan's involved in it, but I also think we haven't grown, is when there's something as polarizing as the current conversation, it shuts down that part of your brain that's curious. And you go into that flight or fight, and you're defensive from the get-go. And I think part of what I'm trying to lead our conversation, our community into, is getting curious about how you're seeing this, what's going on in your mind. We're not going to solve this. We're going to see the world through your eyes. If I can see the world through your eyes, we can probably move a little closer to where we need to go to. Nhlanhla, we've spoken before about how Black Lives Matter currently is mostly a middle-class issue. It almost hasn't kind of got into the poorer community yet because of internet, etc. And what I find with a lot of my white friends, and often historically, I would have thought you kind of look at black people and you go, you're all government, you're all ANC. But the truth of the middle class is that's not true. A lot of them are apolitical, or they vote for different parties, and they don't particularly agree with where government's at on many things. Just paint a better picture of that for me.
Maybe let's start with the Black Lives Matter. Look, obviously, it's a CNN. It's a CNN issue. We watch CNN, we watch BBC, etc., CNBC, Fox News, etc. So it hasn't, and then obviously through that we begin to share. So it hasn't really filtered to the bottom end of the market. However, the majority of the masses are feeling what Floyd felt every day. And I think that's the crux of it. They feel it more than I do, because in my circles I interact with you, with Russell, and everyone else. We are a lot more a particular class, and we respect each other. But at the bottom end of the market, they still called different names. They still called, boy, an old man who's 55, working hard in the garden for his family, is still called a boy. And. So the Black Lives Matter in reality is there in our daily lives. Now, I want to clarify something regarding government. We all have gripes with government.
Yeah.
And I think that must be clear.
That's important that we hear.
Yeah, we all have issues with government. We all are unhappy with corruption. Black or white, doesn't matter. We are all unhappy with corruption. We are all unhappy with poor governance. We are all unhappy with the way our finances, the fiscus is being utilized. We are all unhappy with the inefficiency of our parastatals, state-owned entities. We are all unhappy with certain people getting positions because of their political affiliations, not because they are efficient. So we are aware of all these issues, and we voice them in the various media where we get, could it be it social media, be it political parties and meetings and etc. So we are all unhappy. And so we strongly believe that as a country, we are supposed to have advanced significantly. We strongly believe we're supposed to have advanced, in taking a lot of people out of poverty. But the truth of the matter is, up to this day, we would not have achieved, even if there was absolutely zero corruption, we would not have been able to redress the historical imbalances of this country. And I think I want to make that clear so that, we're not condoning government corruption. By engaging in this conversation. We're saying it is wrong, and as wrong as it is, they would have made a lot of progress with infrastructure. It would have made, if there was no corruption, would have made a lot of progress in taking, a significant portion of the people. However, the historical past imbalances are still alive to this day. Let me just give you an example. My mom is very entrepreneurial. She's an amazing entrepreneur. Unfortunately, she's totally illiterate. She didn't go to school. Why? Because she had to walk 18 kilometers to get to the school. 18 kilometers, not back there and back. 18 kilometers. That's the one school that was there in the area, which was too far, obviously. Her parents decided not to send her. She's 78 years. I strongly believe, had my mom had the opportunities that I had, let's not even talk about the opportunities that I had. Had my mom been given an opportunity to go to school, because government of the time would have invested in the schools in her area where she grew up, my mom would have been something very significant in the community. She's brilliant, she's bright. Yeah. The same with my old man. However, my mom was a cleaner at Epworth, Epworth in a private school in Pietermaritzburg. So she was excluded. As a result of that, it affected my entire family. Yeah. And the next generation, which are our nieces and nephews. As a result, myself and those, because we are six, there are six of us, but not all of us are as successful as myself. So those few have got to now support our nieces and nephews in order for them to get out of poverty. Yeah. So the effect of poverty, of apartheid, we are still feeling it now. However, we are lucky because they are lucky, my nieces and nephews, because I'm there and my other siblings, brothers and sisters are there to support them. However, probably 60-70% of the population still don't have that luxury of getting support from their other siblings, whether it be uncles like myself, or aunts, etc., because they are all swimming in poverty. Yeah. So the effect of apartheid, we are still feeling it now. However, government, we all agree, government is making a lot of mistakes, which we hopefully going to be correcting shortly.
So I want to dive into this, and then we're going to go to you, Russell, on the 4 ways forward. I have heard and thought and know that a lot of people say, it's been 26 years. It's been this long. And that's highly offensive. It's highly offensive, not because you don't think government messed up, but because it shows a lack of comprehension of the generational effect of apartheid. Maybe just speak to that for a few minutes. You're going to have to be quick because we don't have that much time, but just speak to that for a couple of minutes, just so that people understand the offensive nature of that.
Ross, maybe I will also add to the way forward, because I think we're running out of time. Cool. And the other speakers need to take a chance. An opportunity. I don't want to take everything. My view is 26 years is a long time. As I was saying earlier, we probably would have taken 25% of the people out of poverty. Yeah. 30%. These are just statistics I'm throwing out there. They're not modeled. Yeah. But it's 30% out of 60%. Who are currently in poverty. In other words, we would have made a dent of probably another 15% out of poverty. If government was, pushing as hard as possible, because we're spending the fiscus on, on corruption. Okay. So that's in my view, that's just a number I'm throwing out there. So we'd still be sitting with another 45%. Now, what I think we should do, Ross, because I think that's quite important, is, Fundisi, we need to have this kind of conversations as a start. But ultimately, we all as a country need to sit down and say, let's start today. This is 2020. And have a 20-year plan. Because all along, it has been government pushing us to do stuff. We've been complying and ticking boxes. If we continue with the tick box, model, it's not going to work, because we are going to continue with fronting, and we are going to continue to make those few successful. I'm going to take opportunities and opportunities and opportunities because I've built a balance sheet. I can access funding, but the rest of the population can't, because they don't have properties, and they don't have the balance sheet, which they don't have assets, etc., etc. And I'm lucky. And so the whole point is, we've got to begin a conversation, a new CODESA as a country, and say, how do we make sure that we sit down? And I know Brother Russell is going to take it to the next level. But how do we make sure that we start this new conversation now? A conversation which says, let's start afresh. We understand the pain, but we can't start unless people begin to understand the pain. So let's take this thing to the next level. Let's do a different BE. Let it be voluntary. Let's do a different land reform program. Let it be voluntary. Like my friend, James. James owns a 2,500 hectare farm. And 15, 18 years ago, he said, I'm giving my labor tenants 600 hectares. His labor tenants, 40 families, own 600 hectares. Guess what? That's land reform. He still owns 1,800. It's made a dent into his wealth, but guess what? He still owns one. It was voluntary. It was not because government wanted him to do it, but he took it upon himself to do it. In my view, let's have a conversation that says the next 20 years, we are not complying with government policy. We are just voluntarily taking, especially for us as the Christians.
Yeah. You said something profound to me the other day. You said when BEE is shoved down someone's throat, there is no way they're going to respond positively. But when Christ calls you to engage in empowering, and it's actually empowering underprivileged, just whoever you are, underprivileged, and the majority of that are black people. When your heart is shifted towards empowering, now we're in a conversation that can shift my kids' lives.
Yeah.
And that's
completely different. Yeah, you're quite right. Yeah. It's got to be us taking an initiative. It must not be government forcing us. It must be us. But government is going to continue to force us for as long as we don't have these conversations, for as long as we don't have a new CODESA, which will say, we need to do something. We acknowledge. We need to take people out of poverty. Inequality is too high, and. Thank you.
Can I just add to that before Russ goes, is that sometimes we think only of empowering people economically or empowering them in different ways. But I think also that just the simple empowerment of stature, of dignity. There's a couple of cultures in this country who were like, I won't let my children call Russell. He's not their age. That 15-year-old cannot. He will be called Uncle Russell. He's no relation of mine, he's whatever, but he needs to be given the stature that he deserves in our society. And I think that's also the other thing. Like I've said to my children, you will not call our housekeeper by her first name. You don't pay her. She's not your age. You will call her Sisi so-and-so or Auntie so-and-so. Yes. And that simple thing of empowering dignity in the people around us will make even if we cannot empower them economically, I can stand taller if someone calls me Auntie so-and-so. You know what I mean? If someone just goes, I know your name and I remember it.
Yeah.
Not boy when you're 55.
Yeah.
God does not call us to that kind of lack of dignifying other people.
Yeah, very good. Russ, 4 steps.
Yeah. Thanks, Russ. I think it's important that we all start with the why. That's Simon Sinek, start with the why. If we don't have these conversations, if we don't start to try and take steps forward, well then rage will dominate. And rage is like a wildfire. The last thing anyone wants is a repeat of the French Revolution or some other kind of uncontrolled implosion.
Yeah.
So why should we have these conversations? Why should we look to try and find ways forward? Well, Psalm 133, where there's unity, God commands a blessing. So there's a better why. Why should we have these things?
How about Audrey's just tired?
Sick and tired, man.
Sick and tired, tired with the why.
Why should we have these conversations? What was Jesus' answer when he was asked, what's the most important commandment? Love your God with all your heart, mind, soul, but also love your neighbor as you love yourself.
Yeah.
So why must we exert ourselves? Why must we have these conversations? Why must I get to know your culture group and yours mine? Is because I can't love her if I don't know her. And she can't love me if she thinks I'm a nutcase. So, Ross, and then even worse things come into play, which we're seeing in all this Black Lives Matter. Proverbs 18:21, the power of life and death in our tongue. Everyone is so brave, sitting, typing behind your LCD screen and throwing these Molotov cocktails. So let's just do 4 things, Ross. And it was touched on. And these aren't my particular IP. It's come through sociologists, it's come through professors, it's well studied, it's well packaged. I'm a man, I like a color by numbers. Number 1, lament. Let's mutually lament that the position that of the past and of the present, it's got things that really suck.
Yeah, they suck.
Let's lament about these things collectively, mutually. Number 2, let's listen. Listen with empathy, actively listening. And it's a mutual two-way thing. Let's listen to each other and get to know these things. 3, let's learn. I want to know more about you. I want to know more about you. I want to know more about my Indian cousins. I want to know more about my colored brothers. So actively find out more of what your past was like, what my present is like, and what your children's future will be like. Learn. Doing all of that wrapped with empathy. Empathy and love. Empathy and love, empathy and love. And lastly then, hopefully the Holy Spirit will be infusing all of that to allow us to then come together and lead together into very practical, pragmatic interventions to go and together again address these injustices that are out there. Social injustices, economic, spiritual, etc. So we need to lament.
Yeah.
We need to listen. And if I want you to listen to me, I have to speak in a way that will be conducive to you listening to me. So listen, learn, and then let's get back to leading together practically in interventions that we can do together to address the obvious injustices around the world.
Brilliant.
4 L's, eh?
You got
4
them.
L's. Lament, listen, etc., etc. But it's 4 L's.
Lament, listen, learn, and lead.
Typical pastoral.
And if we don't do it in the body of Christ, those out there will do it, and they'll do it in anger rather than in love. And there's a huge population that say they're Christian in this country. We've got to start there and say, how do I, as a person who loves God and should love people, how do I follow these 4 ways?
Let's want to end with you, and I'm giving you the difficult task of speaking to older people, and you get to say, this is what I would love to change.
Let me give it a shot. So if I'm speaking to older people, I think, so the Christian me, the Christian that you're appealing to in me as well, is saying the same things. Like, we need, like, I'd love for people to listen. I've been thinking of myself and comparing the Black Lives Matter thing and how people have responded to the way I responded to the women's rights movement.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time it was with, like, in a posture of fighting, because I don't believe I'm trash. You know what I'm saying? And that was not the right response. In hindsight, it was not the right response, because maybe a few people in their inability to argue as well as I do have set themselves up for me to be able to give a good fight or something, or a good rebuttal. But I have never taken the time to really, really listen.
Yeah.
And so people really need to start to listen. And so I said that this Christian part of me, because that's like we've come to a critical point, I believe. The same way that America came to the George Floyd incident, where people have been screaming and crying foul for so long, saying, please listen, please have these conversations, and haven't been heard, that it boiled over to one incident where it was so overt and so painful, and clear for everyone to see that it led to like anarchy in some places. I believe the same thing will happen to South Africa if we don't start to listen and listen intentionally. Listen with the intention to not sympathy. I don't think we want sympathy anymore as young people. I think we're past sympathy now. We want change. And so all people need to listen, hear what the problem is, the way we see it or understand it. And then I don't care if you don't believe there's privilege or if you don't believe that like the history was unjust. Just look at the landscape the way it is now, agree and acknowledge that it's wrong and it shouldn't be this way.
And lament.
Lament, and then also, because I agree with something else, the thing that you said, lead. Wherever you are, government or non-government, you need to lead from where you gave me a raise, and and now I can afford to buy lots of pairs of shoes, but I don't think it's right that with my privilege of being able to buy that many pairs of shoes, knowing that I can pay something like 600 Rand for someone's school fees. Understand? So in my little position of privilege, I've got the power to change someone else's life, and I would challenge all people to do the same thing. Not because the government is forcing you to, like I was saying, because you believe it's the right thing to do. If we don't do that, anarchy is going to happen, an unled revolution, and we're going to regret. And I think that's closer to our door than we probably believe it is.
Brilliant. Friends, we have to wrap up. I feel like we've just skimmed the surface, but I wanted to model to you the conversations I have. And I have these conversations regularly. I've engaged in this probably for the last 2 to 4 years, really trying to find partners to build a better South Africa with. I haven't tried to solve the government's problem. I don't believe God calls you as a child to solve his problems. I believe he calls you to pray and love. And I feel like now, if we keep blaming and calling out and trying to solve the big problem, and we don't get into the conversation, we're going to completely miss the point, and we're going to miss a chance both in our church and miss a chance in this country to hold middle class together for a better tomorrow. I pray that as we start to create more platforms for conversations that will be done in this kind of way, I pray that God will shift your perspective a little. These are beautiful people who actually deeply love our church and want to see our church strong in this area. And I know that I will have many, many more messages on my phone now, but I wanted to ask you just to let what's been talked about just sit for a while. Let the Holy Spirit do something with that, and maybe he can shift us all a little bit. May God bless you. Thank you so much for joining me, and we will see you soon. We'll be posting on next steps in the next few days. God bless.